when Algerian sailors challenged George Washington's America. Imagine that the world's most powerful nation today was once unable to protect its own ships. And imagine that President George Washington himself watched with growing concern as American vessels fell into the hands of Algerian sailors in the Mediterranean Sea. A time when the United States was a young and fragile nation, Algiers stood as a respected maritime power, feared across the Mediterranean. This is not a legend. It is the true story of a confrontation between a rising nation and a fleet that had earned its reputation upon the waves. Birth of a nation and a growing fear. The year 1783. The United States had emerged victorious from the War of Independence. George Washington stood as a national hero and the first president of America. Americans dreamed of prosperity, and their merchant ships began sailing toward the lucrative markets of the Mediterranean. But beyond the horizon, a challenge awaited them. Not a European army, not a rival empire, but the fleet of Algiers. At that time, Algiers was one of the dominant naval powers of the Mediterranean. Its sailors were renowned for their courage, seamanship, and generations of maritime experience. The sight of Algerian sails on the horizon commanded attention throughout the region. Their swift vessels could appear suddenly from the sea and disappear just as quickly into the distance. The news that reached Washington then, in 1785, everything changed. Algerian corsairs intercepted 2 American merchant ships. The American crews were taken captive and brought to Algiers. News crossed the Atlantic and eventually reached the young American government. A stunned silence followed. How could a nation that had just won its independence fail to protect its own colonies? Reports soon arrived on President Washington's desk. He understood the reality. America had no powerful navy. The nation lacked the means to project military force across the Mediterranean. Yet the honor of the young republic was at stake. Washington faces reality. Washington gathered his advisors. Difficult questions stood before them. Should America pay for the safety of its ships? Or should it build a navy capable of standing among the maritime powers of the world? The choice was far from simple. The treasury was strained. The military was small. The American navy barely existed. Meanwhile, Algeria possessed experienced sailors who had mastered the Mediterranean through years of navigation and warfare. Knew its winds, currents, harbors, and narrow passages better than most of their rivals. For years, diplomacy remained America's only practical option. A city that commanded respect on the southern shores of the Mediterranean, Algiers was living through an era of maritime influence. Its harbor bustled with activity. Ships arrived and departed daily. Cannons guarded the coastline. Sailors returned from distant voyages, carrying stories of storms, battles, and adventure. Europeans and Americans alike, Algiers became a name impossible to ignore. A captain entering the Mediterranean understood that Algerian naval power was a reality that demanded respect. The reputation of Algerian sailors often reached foreign ports before they did. The decision that changed America. George Washington eventually recognized a crucial truth. If the United States wished to become a strong and respected nation, it needed a navy capable of protecting its trade and interests. Thus began the birth of the modern U.S. Navy. Warships were commissioned. Sailors were trained. A permanent naval force slowly took shape. Ironically, one of the key motivations behind this transformation was the challenge posed by Algeria in the Mediterranean. Strength and influence of Algerian seafarers forced American leaders to rethink the future of their nation. Looking back today, this story is about far more than ships and naval encounters. It is the story of George Washington, leading a young republic struggling to establish itself on the world stage. It is also the story of Algeria at the height of its maritime influence, and of courageous sailors whose reputation extended across the Mediterranean. 2 nations met upon the waves. One was beginning its journey toward becoming a global power. The other stood as a respected maritime force of its age. From their encounter emerged one of the most fascinating and overlooked chapters in naval history. If you enjoyed this incredible story of George Washington and the Algerian sailors who challenged America's early ambition, be sure to like this video and subscribe to Epic Battles for more epic stories of forgotten conflicts, legendary warriors, and the events that shaped history.